The death of Mary, the mother of Jesus, is one of the greatest mysteries in Christian history. Did she truly die like any human being, or was she taken directly to heaven? Between historical accounts, apocryphal texts, and the tradition of the Assumption, the answers vary and provoke deep reflections to this day. In this video we will investigate the sources, theories, and beliefs surrounding Mary's final days, unraveling what we know, and what remains an enigma. Prepare for a journey that blends history, spirituality, and religious curiosities. The silence of Scripture regarding Mary's final days left a void that Christian traditions have strived to fill over the centuries. It is within this context that we find the rich tapestry of apocryphal accounts, historical speculations, and theological interpretations that shape today's understanding of the end of her earthly life. To grasp the depth of this mystery, we must first explore the historical and cultural setting in which these traditions emerged. It is impossible to ignore the absence of any explicit mention of Mary's death in the New Testament. Even authors such as John, who, according to tradition, cared for Mary after Jesus' crucifixion, make no reference to her final days. This silence is curious, considering that less central figures in the biblical narrative had their deaths documented, such as the apostles Peter and Paul, whose executions were described or widely acknowledged in church history. This gap has led many scholars to question: could this be a reflection of the oral nature of early Christian traditions, which took time to be recorded? Or perhaps Mary's death was considered a private event, shrouded in reverence and mystery? Moreover, we must consider the context in which the Gospels and other New Testament texts were written, prioritizing the actions and teachings of Jesus. Another common hypothesis is that the silence regarding Mary reflects a theological purpose. Some scholars argue that the focus of the early Christian narrative was exclusively on Christ, relegating figures like Mary to a secondary role. However, over the centuries her importance grew, especially after Christianity became the dominant religion of the Roman Empire. Over time, this gap was filled by apocryphal writings, texts not included in the official biblical canon but which played a significant role in shaping Christian traditions. One of the most famous is the Transitus Mariae, which provides detailed accounts of the final days of Jesus' mother. The Transitus Mariae narrates events from the announcement of her death to her heavenly glorification. According to the account, an angel appeared to Mary to inform her that her time had come. In response, Mary prepared herself spiritually, miraculously gathering the apostles, who were scattered around the world, into her presence. The text describes her death, or dormition, as a serene and profoundly spiritual event accompanied by heavenly hymns. After her death, the apostles reportedly witnessed her body being carried to heaven by angels. The extraordinary nature of these events reinforced devotion to Mary as a unique and sacred figure. Despite not being a canonical text, the Transitus Mariae deeply influenced Christian tradition, especially in the East. It was widely accepted by early Christian communities and helped establish the concept of the dormition as a religious celebration. In the early centuries of Christianity, there was significant diversity in beliefs and practices regarding Mary. This period, often referred to as the early church, was marked by efforts to consolidate doctrines and eliminate ambiguities. Early Christian communities were highly decentralized, with many of them having their own oral traditions about Mary. These traditions varied significantly depending on geographic location and local cultural influences. For instance, churches in the Middle East emphasized spiritual and transcendental aspects of Mary's life, while communities in the West, influenced by Roman thought, tended to highlight her role as a divine intercessor. It was only in the 4th century that narratives about Mary began to be formalized in writing. This period coincided with the establishment of Christianity as the official religion of the Roman Empire, which brought greater uniformity to religious doctrines. Another intriguing question about Mary's final days is the location where they occurred. Jerusalem and Ephesus emerge as the main candidates, each with its own historical and spiritual evidence. According to Eastern traditions, Mary spent her final days in Jerusalem, in the area known as Mount Zion. The Dormition Basilica, built on the site where Mary is believed to have died, is a significant landmark of this tradition. This narrative is supported by accounts of early pilgrims who visited Jerusalem searching for locations associated with Mary. Additionally, Jerusalem, as the central city of early Christianity, makes it plausible that Mary remained there until the end of her life. On the other hand, some assert that Mary spent her final days in Ephesus in present-day Turkey. This tradition is based on Mary's connection to John, the beloved disciple, who is said to have lived in this region after Christ's crucifixion. The so-called House of the Virgin Mary, located near Ephesus, is a pilgrimage site that attracts thousands of visitors annually. This tradition gained prominence after the Council of Ephesus in 431, which declared Mary as Theotokos, Mother of God, highlighting the city's importance in Marian devotion. Both locations present compelling historical and spiritual arguments, but neither provides conclusive evidence. The debate over where Mary spent her final days remains open, reflecting the complexity and richness of Christian traditions. Before the stories about Mary were recorded in writing, they circulated for centuries as oral tradition. This process, common in early Christian communities, allowed the narratives to evolve and adapt to local contexts. For example, in Eastern tradition, Mary's Dormition is often described as a peaceful and deeply spiritual event, reflecting that cultures focus on themes of transcendence and unity. In the West, the emphasis on the Assumption reflects a more triumphalist view, celebrating Mary as a symbol of victory over death. Moreover, oral traditions were crucial for preserving Mary's memory during a time when Christianity was still a persecuted religion. These narratives help strengthen the faith of Christian communities and promote devotion to Mary as a central figure in spirituality. Given the numerous accounts and traditions, the question arises: why does Mary's death remain shrouded in mystery? Perhaps the answer lies in the very nature of her figure. As the mother of Jesus, Mary occupies a unique position in Christianity, a bridge between the divine and the human. Her mystery is not just a historical issue but also an expression of her spiritual transcendence. Another factor contributing to the mystery is the lack of concrete evidence. Unlike other Christian saints and martyrs, whose relics have been preserved and venerated over the centuries, there are no records of relics associated with Mary. This absence has led many to believe that she was assumed into heaven, body and soul, reinforcing the dogma of the Assumption. The lack of concrete information about Mary's final days leaves room for various interpretations, and as we've seen in the previous chapter, these interpretations are rooted in distinct traditions and texts that reflect different cultures and theologies. When discussing the end of her earthly life, two major questions arise. Did Mary die before being assumed into heaven, or was she directly taken up without experiencing death? The idea of Mary's Dormition, widely held in Eastern Christianity, proposes that she underwent a natural death, like any other human being, before being gloriously taken to heaven. The term dormition, from the Latin dormitio meaning sleep, reflects the view that her death was not an ordinary event but a moment of spiritual peace and divine transition. This perspective finds support in texts such as the Transitus Mariae and other apocryphal sources. According to these narratives, Mary's death was foretold by an angel, and the apostles were miraculously transported from their missions around the world to witness her passing. After her death, the apostles reportedly placed her body in a tomb, which was later found empty, a sign that Mary had been assumed into heaven, body and soul. In Eastern Christianity, Mary's Dormition is celebrated as a major liturgical feast, particularly in the Orthodox Church, where the event is seen as an expression of the mystery of salvation. For the Orthodox, the Dormition does not diminish Mary's sanctity. Rather, it highlights her humanity and her full participation in the redemption offered by Christ. Western tradition emphasizes Mary's direct assumption into heaven. According to this view, Mary did not experience death in the traditional sense. Instead, she was taken up into heaven in a glorified state, bypassing the physical corruption associated with human mortality. This interpretation is deeply influenced by Catholic theology, which sees Mary as a reflection of divine and immaculate purity. The theological reasoning behind this belief is tied to the dogma of the Immaculate Conception. If Mary was conceived without original sin, it follows that she would be spared from the consequences of sin, including physical death. The formalization of this belief occurred in 1950, when Pope Pius XII proclaimed the dogma of the Assumption. In his declaration, he did not specify whether Mary died before her Assumption, leaving the question open. However, popular belief in the West often favors the idea that Mary did not die, reflecting the view of her exceptional nature compared to other humans. While both dormition and direct assumption are widely accepted beliefs, there is little historical evidence to conclusively support either perspective. The apocryphal texts, though influential, do not carry the same historical or theological weight as the Gospels. Furthermore, they were written centuries after the events they describe, making them less reliable as direct historical accounts. The fact that the early church did not record details of Mary's death raises further questions. Could such a significant event have been completely overlooked? Or does the lack of records reflect a tradition of sacred silence, where Mary's life and death were seen as mysteries beyond full comprehension or description? The divergence between dormition and direct assumption also reflects cultural and theological differences between Eastern and Western Christianity. The idea of dormition aligns with the Eastern theological emphasis on the mystical union between God and humanity. For the Orthodox, Mary's death is an expression of her full participation in the human condition, as well as her transformation by divine grace. Catholic theology, particularly from the Middle Ages onward, highlighted Mary's uniqueness as the Mother of God. This led to the development of the idea that her direct assumption reflects her exceptional status, placing her above human limitations. The question of whether Mary died before her Assumption might seem like a theological detail. However, this issue touches on deeper themes, such as the relationship between the human and the divine, the meaning of death, and the promise of resurrection. If Mary died, then her dormition becomes a powerful testimony to the redemption offered by Christ, showing that even those closest to God share in the human experience. On the other hand, if she was directly assumed into heaven, her Assumption becomes a sign of her uniqueness and her special connection to the Creator. The lack of concrete historical evidence about Mary's final days means that beliefs about her dormition or Assumption are largely matters of faith. Yet this does not diminish their importance. Rather, it highlights how faith can shape narratives and create symbols that transcend time and culture. One point often raised in discussions about Mary's final fate is the absence of any relics associated with her. In the early centuries of Christianity, the veneration of relics was a widespread practice. The remains of saints and martyrs were treated with great reverence, and their preservation was seen as a testament to their holiness and closeness to God. However, there are no records of relics of Mary, such as bones or other physical remnants, being venerated anywhere. This is particularly intriguing, given her central importance to Christian faith. For many, this absence serves as evidence of her Assumption into heaven, body and soul, reinforcing the belief that she did not undergo physical decay. Some scholars argue that the silence regarding relics could be attributed to a tradition of profound respect for her figure. Perhaps early Christians chose not to preserve or display any remains of Mary as an act of reverence, maintaining the mystery surrounding her death and glorification. Beyond theological discussions, Mary's death and Assumption have also inspired countless popular narratives over the centuries. In many cultures, legends and stories have emerged that blend historical, religious, and mythical elements. For instance, in some medieval traditions, it was believed that flowers miraculously bloomed in Mary's tomb after her Assumption, a sign of her purity and sanctity. In others, A heavenly light was said to illuminate the site where she was taken to heaven. These stories, though not canonical, played an important role in shaping popular devotion to Mary. These narratives reflect the human desire to understand and celebrate the mystery surrounding Mary. They also demonstrate how faith and collective imagination can come together to create powerful symbols that transcend cultural and temporal boundaries. Although the dogma of the Assumption is widely accepted in Catholic Christianity, the debate over Mary's final days remains relevant. In recent years, theologians and historians have explored new ways to understand this mystery, employing tools such as archaeology, textual criticism, and cultural anthropology. For example, recent research on the empty tomb attributed to Mary in Jerusalem has raised interesting questions about the historicity of the Dormition and Assumption. While these investigations are ongoing, they illustrate how the search for answers continues to inspire fresh perspectives on ancient traditions. Regardless of which interpretation of Mary's final fate is accepted, the mystery surrounding her last days remains a source of inspiration and reflection for modern Christians. For many, the absence of definitive answers is not a failure but an invitation to explore the depths of faith and the human relationship with the divine. The culmination of discussions about Mary's final days is the belief in her glorious assumption into heaven. This event, whether preceded by her death or not, occupies a central place in Christian spirituality. More than a theological detail, the Assumption is seen as a profound connection between the human and the divine, a symbol of hope for humanity, and a reflection of Mary's uniqueness as the Mother of God. But how did this belief become established? And what is its significance for millions of faithful around the world? To answer these questions, we must delve into the history of the Assumption, from its origins in apocryphal traditions to its formalization as a dogma in the 20th century. The idea that Mary was taken into heaven, body and soul, has deep roots in early Christian traditions. As we have seen, texts like the Transitus Mariae describe her dormition and Assumption as almost inseparable, presenting Mary's glorification as a natural and inevitable event, given her unique role in salvation history. The belief in the Assumption was not limited to the East. In the West, devotion to Mary began to grow rapidly from the 4th century, influenced by theology emphasizing her purity and sanctity. During this period, references in sermons and writings by church fathers such as St. Ambrose and St. Augustine exalt Mary as a figure exempt from the consequences of original sin. Despite its growing popularity, Mary's Assumption remained an informal belief for centuries. There was no official consensus on the details of her death or glorification, which allowed for the development of various local traditions and theological interpretations. It was only in 1950 that the Catholic Church, under the leadership of Pope Pius XII, officially declared the Assumption of Mary as a dogma of faith. In his encyclical Munificentissimus Deus, Pius XII affirmed that Mary, having completed the course of her earthly life, was assumed body and soul into heavenly glory. This proclamation marked a historic moment in the Church's history, consolidating centuries of devotion and reaffirming Mary's role as the glorified Mother of Christ and humanity. Before declaring the Assumption as dogma, Pope Pius XII conducted a global consultation with bishops and theologians to assess the consensus surrounding this belief. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with most expressing that the Assumption was already widely accepted as part of the Catholic faith. The declaration of the dogma not only confirmed the Assumption as an essential belief but also elevated it to the status of an unquestionable truth of Catholic faith. For many, this reinforced Mary's centrality in Christian theology and offered a powerful symbol of hope and resurrection. The Assumption of Mary is not merely a theological event. It is also a profound symbol that resonates with the faithful on various spiritual levels. By being taken into heaven, Mary represents the promise of redemption and eternal life for all humanity. Her Assumption is viewed as a foreshadowing of the destiny awaiting those who follow Christ. The Assumption also reflects Mary's purity, which, according to Catholic doctrine, was preserved from original sin from her conception. This makes her glorification a testament to the transformative power of divine grace. In Christian spirituality, Mary is often seen as a loving mother and intercessor before God. Her Assumption reinforces this image, placing her in a uniquely close position to the Creator. Over the centuries, Mary's Assumption has inspired some of the most iconic works of Christian art. Renaissance painters such as Titian and Caravaggio depicted her glorification with a blend of majesty and intimacy, capturing the essence of the event as a moment of spiritual triumph. In liturgy, the Assumption is celebrated with great solemnity, particularly on August 15th, the feast day of the Assumption. In many cultures, this celebration includes processions, prayers, and acts of devotion that highlight Mary's central role in the Christian faith. Mary's Assumption is not merely an abstract belief, it is a source of comfort and inspiration for millions of people worldwide. For many, the idea that Mary was taken into heaven serves as a reminder that suffering and death do not have the final word. Her glorification is seen as an invitation to hope and trust in God's love. Furthermore, the Assumption underscores Mary's unique role as the spiritual mother of all Christians. Her presence in heaven is perceived as a sign of her continued intercession and care for those who seek her help and guidance. Although the Assumption has been formalized as dogma, it remains shrouded in mystery. The exact details of how and when this event occurred have never been defined, and perhaps never will be. But for many, this does not diminish its power. On the contrary, the mystery is part of what makes the Assumption so meaningful. If the story of Mary's Assumption into heaven naturally carries a sense of mystery, additional elements make this enigma even more fascinating. Historical surprises, unexpected declarations by religious authorities, and little-known traditions contribute to the aura of mystery surrounding Mary's final days. These moments, often forgotten or rarely discussed, help construct a rich narrative full of layers and meaning. One of the most intriguing moments involving Mary occurred during the Council of Chalcedon, held in 451 AD. During this historic meeting, which gathered bishops from across the Christian world to discuss doctrinal matters, Byzantine Emperor Marcian and his wife, Pulcheria, made a surprising request. They asked the bishops of Jerusalem to bring Mary's body to Constantinople to be enshrined in a newly constructed church in her honor. The response from the bishops of Jerusalem was unexpected. They stated that they could not fulfill the request because Mary's body was no longer on earth. According to them, Mary had been assumed into heaven, body and soul. This declaration, made nearly 400 years after the events supposedly occurred, is one of the earliest explicit references to Mary's Assumption in an official church context. It also raises a series of intriguing questions. Did the bishops genuinely believe that Mary left no relics on earth? Or was this statement a way to emphasize her sanctity and the mystery surrounding her figure? Another revelation that adds suspense to the story is the existence of two distinct locations claiming to be Mary's tomb, one in Jerusalem and the other in Ephesus. The tomb, located in the Kidron Valley, near the Mount of Olives, has been venerated for centuries as the site where Mary was buried before her Assumption. Pilgrims from the early centuries documented visits to the site, describing it as a sacred space of deep devotion. The House of the Virgin Mary, near Ephesus, is another highly venerated site. Discovered in the 19th century based on the visions of a mystic named Catherine Emmerich, the site attracts thousands of pilgrims annually. Although there is no conclusive archaeological evidence, many believe that Mary spent her final days there under the care of the Apostle John. The existence of two locations claiming this honor adds to the mystery. But perhaps most fascinating is that in both cases, the accounts point to the absence of physical relics, a detail that reinforces the belief in the Assumption. Over the centuries, Mary's story has been enriched by local traditions and cultural interpretations, often introducing surprising or unknown elements. For example, in some Eastern traditions, it is believed that at the moment of the Assumption, flowers in Mary's tomb exuded a heavenly fragrance, a sign of her purity and sanctity. In others, it is described that angels descended in procession to escort her to heaven in a spectacle of light and glory. These elements, though not based in Scripture, highlight how different cultures have expressed their devotion to Mary, transforming her story into a living and multifaceted narrative. One of the greatest mysteries surrounding Mary's death is the absolute silence of the Gospels on the subject. As previously discussed, even authors such as John, who according to tradition cared for Mary after Jesus' crucifixion, do not mention her final days. This raises an intriguing question. Was this silence accidental or deliberate? Some theologians argue that the Gospel's silence reflects profound respect for the mystery surrounding Mary, preserving her story as something sacred and inaccessible. Others suggest that the absence of accounts provides an opportunity for each generation of Christians to interpret her life and death in the light of their own faith. The absence of Mary's relics is often seen as evidence of her assumption. However, some scholars suggest another possibility. What if Mary's relics did exist but were lost or destroyed over the centuries? While this scenario is unlikely, it is not impossible. During the early centuries of Christianity, many communities faced persecution and destruction. It is possible that any physical trace associated with Mary was lost in those turbulent times. On the other hand, the belief that there are no relics because Mary was directly assumed into heaven remains the most widely accepted explanation among the faithful. In modern times, the mystery surrounding Mary continues to inspire new discoveries and debates. Archaeologists and historians have explored sites associated with her final days, while theologians continue to discuss the spiritual implications of her dormition and assumption. One of the most recent surprises came from archaeological research conducted at Mary's tomb in Jerusalem. Although studies are still ongoing, they have raised intriguing questions about early Christian burial practices and their veneration of Mary. These efforts, though limited by gaps in historical records, demonstrate how the mystery of Mary continues to challenge and inspire both science and faith. Perhaps the greatest intrigue surrounding Mary's death is the very absence of definitive answers. In an era that values logic and evidence, Mary's story invites us to embrace mystery as an essential element of faith. Mary's story, marked by mystery, devotion, and transcendence, continues to inspire millions of people around the world. Reflecting on her final days and her assumption into heaven, we are encouraged to look beyond theological and historical debates. We are called to connect with the universal lessons of her life: faith, hope, and unconditional love. At the heart of her story, Mary is a reflection of humanity elevated by divine grace. Her earthly life, filled with challenges and difficult choices, is not so distant from our own journeys. And her heavenly glorification reminds us of the promise of something greater, a destiny that transcends the struggles of daily life. Just as Mary faced uncertainty with courage and faith, we are challenged to do the same. What can her story teach us about responding to our own moments of doubt? How can we find purpose in our lives, even when we lack all the answers? The absence of definitive answers about Mary's final days is not an obstacle to faith. It is an opportunity to deepen it. The mystery surrounding her death and assumption reminds us that not everything needs to be fully understood to be meaningful. We are invited to embrace mystery as a vital element of our spirituality. In a world that values quick explanations and definitive conclusions, Mary's story encourages us to accept the unknown with humility and trust. Now is the time to bring this reflection into our own lives. Consider, how can you apply Mary's virtues in your daily life? Are there ways to live with more faith, patience, or compassion? Additionally, join the conversation. Share your thoughts and experiences about how Mary's story impacts your worldview. Leave a comment about what inspires you most in this narrative. Your contribution could help others deepen their connection to this rich topic. More than a story, Mary is a point of connection for billions of people worldwide. By celebrating her life and glorification, we create bonds that unite us in faith and hope. We encourage you to continue exploring this and other topics that enrich your spirituality. Like and subscribe to ensure you don't miss our upcoming videos, where we will continue to uncover the great mysteries of faith and Christian history. Thank you for joining us on this spiritual journey. See you soon.